Kia ora koutou, welcome along to today's Council Workshop, 14th of February 2024, Valentine's Day. For those who need reminding, thanks for reminding me yesterday, that little whisperer of mine. We have papers circulated to run through today, and the outline for today is here for the workshop this morning. Got a council meeting after lunch, and then we'll just create some space for councillor CEO time after the council meeting as well. So, council workshop first of all. Sharon, anything you want to say at the start before we hand over to the team?
Thank you, Sam. No, not in particular. Tim and Jodie have got the lead today, so hand over to them and just acknowledge and thanks the team for the continued hard work on this.
Thank you, and I'll just note Elizabeth was an apology for lateness. She'll be here soon.
Thank you and morning, Council. Today we've got another workshop. Jenny's actually on holiday right now, so we've got Jodie here in her place. She's in LA, Jenny, and actually got, I understand, finished second in an ultra marathon, which is up and down hills, and that was the second person to finish, so she's obviously the first woman to finish, so well done to Jenny. That's her idea of a holiday, actually, going for it twice. It reflects in some of the work she does. Anyway. Look, today we're going to talk about some supporting documents, some documents that need to be part of the long-term plan and some key foundational documents for it. So in terms of the agenda for today, we're going to actually just talk about a wee bit about the context setting. Then we're going to talk about the infrastructure strategy, financial strategy, and a number of long-term plan policies. And you've seen those policies before, but there's some changes that we want to make sure you're aware of since the December 2023 workshop. And actually, this will be the first time you've seen the infrastructure strategy and the financial strategy. So the purpose of this workshop is to ensure the council will have an opportunity to see and provide input into these key documents. And these need to accompany the consultation document as outlined in the Local Government Act. So as I said, the ones the council have not seen are the infrastructure strategy, the finance strategy, and then the next version of the long-term plans. So that's a bit of introduction, and I'll hand over to Jodie.
So Jodie, if you just use your microphone, thank you.
Thank you. So as Tim mentioned, we're here today to talk you through some of the key documents that underpin, I guess, our decision-making in the long-term plan. And documents that you haven't seen before, as Tim mentioned, are the infrastructure strategy and the finance strategy or the financial strategy. We also have a number of policies to talk to you about, which go into the long-term plan that we've made changes to since December 2023. And the reason why we are bringing these to you is just so that you are aware of them, their purpose, how they feed into the LTP. So when it comes to adopting these documents, you are comfortable to do so as part of the consultation document or as supporting information. So the first piece of documentation we'd like to talk you through is the infrastructure strategy. And I will invite Murray England and Catherine to lead the discussion on this particular documentation because they have been intimately involved in it.
All right, good morning, everybody. So, infrastructure strategy. First of all, I'd like to introduce Catherine Hill, who was with War Infrastructure, so they have helped us pull the infrastructure strategy together. And they've done so for the last 2 or 3 iterations of this document, going back through in 3 yearly cycles. So this is the infrastructure strategy. We've been through the long-term plan, and we sort of refer to this as the long-term plan. So it's just a longer outlook. Instead of being 10 years, this plan looks out over a 30-year time horizon. Although it's called a strategy, it does sort of read more like a plan, and that's because of the legislation requirements. It sort of forces us down that route. So it's called a strategy, but in some ways it sort of reads more like a plan. I'd also like to do a quick shout out to other people who've done a lot of input into this document, our asset managers, so Joe, Yue and Mark, who are here today, but also our growth and development team who've been putting a lot of the background information into it. So, slides already turned over, very efficient. So this is the purpose of the infrastructure strategy, and I'll let Catherine talk mostly through that. But I'll talk to one point first for a handover. As I mentioned, this is providing a 30-year outlook. And I think the reason why the infrastructure strategy was put in place by government was that councils historically have had a lot of budget and expense in year 11. So we do a 10-year plan, and the things we can't afford, we put in year 11 and sort of hide it away. So the infrastructure strategy is here to bring to light that longer horizon of the costs. So I'll pass over to Catherine.
Thank you, Murray. So yeah, as Murray says, this is a strategy that has a 30-year outlook. As he also noted, it's not so much a strategic document as a plan. It is really picking up where you have significant infrastructure asset holding that has a longer life than a 10-year plan. Council need to be making some decisions now around how we manage that into the future. It's also looking at what are the things that are going to hit council and impact how you manage your assets, how you deliver your services into that longer term period. It is a requirement of the Local Government Act. It forms part of your LTP. A summary of it also goes into your consultation document, which I know you'll all be looking at shortly. It connects clearly to your financial strategy, which you'll be discussing later this morning. The challenge in that space is that the infrastructure strategy has a 30-year outlook. Your financial strategy has a 10-year outlook. So the financial strategy component in relation to the infrastructure strategy really deals with, can we afford to do the things we need to be doing, but within that 10-year window. And so we're doing some work with the finance team around how can we make sure we're at least flagging some decisions that council may need to make into that longer term period around the financial affordability of the infrastructure strategy. For those who are interested, the slide here details the legislative requirements. This is really a driver of it becoming more of a plan than a strategy. The legislation is quite prescriptive in terms of the things we have to have in the infrastructure strategy. Council has currently got the longest infrastructure strategy in the country. And so one of the things we've done this time in developing this infrastructure strategy is tried to pare that back, start at the point of what does the infrastructure strategy have to be? What do we have to include, which is demonstrated on this slide, but trying to make sure it fits within your wider suite of LTP documents. So not having that repetition where we can refer to the long-term plan, where we can refer to your activity management plans or other documents. So I won't take you through those details, but that is the reference. As you know, this fits within your long-term plan cycle. So we do develop long-term plans every 3 years, but they have a 10-year outlook. The infrastructure strategy has that 30-year outlook. And what this slide is really looking to demonstrate is that every time you do this, every 3 years, you are moving your plans forward by 3 years. And that's really around increasing your certainty. So year one of your LTP, the next financial year, you have the greatest certainty around what you're planning and what you're forecasting. Years 2 and 3, you improve that certainty by doing your annual plans. Years 4 to 10 is the remainder of the LTP. And the infrastructure strategy, obviously looking at 30 years, has the least amount of certainty. But it's really flagging the things as you move forward in those 3-year planning cycles. What do we need to be looking at incorporating into these future plans?
So as a minimum, we need to include our 5 waters, or the 3 waters particularly, but we have the 5 waters here at Selwyn, and transportation. But in our infrastructure strategy, which is added to the length of it, as we've added in the resource recovery and waste activity, and also community facilities and open spaces. And we've done that because it aligns with our activity management policy. Both these additional assets are strategic in nature, and it also speaks to our sustainability going forward. So Selwyn District Council has taken the approach of including all of our key infrastructure assets, not just the 5 waters and transportation.
So I understand that you've all received the infrastructure strategy. Apologies for the sizable document that you've had to work your way through. This is just a summary of the table of contents of that document, so giving a bit of an outline of the direction we've taken with this document. Changes since your last infrastructure strategy or current infrastructure strategy developed 3 years ago is we've really looked at, as I say, reducing those repetitions, duplications, but also trying to integrate across your infrastructure activities. So rather than having a section on water and a section on transportation, etc., we've tried to look across how council manages its infrastructure activities in a more integrated way.
Awesome. So infrastructure strategy picks up on 4 key challenges, and these are consistent with our activity management policy, and the basis for some of the big decision project identification in the infrastructure strategy. So the first one is managing what we have while planning for the future. And what this means is that we have been a growth council. It's been our focus, and it's been a great thing. But with growth comes new assets, and with new assets come aging assets over time. And so what was a brand new asset in this infrastructure strategy, we're now looking at the bow wave when those assets are coming towards their renewal end of life period. So there's a subtle change to previous infrastructure strategies. It's not just about growth, it's about growth, but also managing what we have. The second challenge is balancing funding and resource constraints. We've identified that managing change, responding to legislative reform, there's been a lot of that, as you can, you're well aware. So how we manage that, and responding to the risks of sustainability and climate change, and how we can identify the ways forward for that.
So under these key challenges, asset managers have been doing some great work to project out 30 years and flag what big decisions they think council might need to be making around how they manage their infrastructure, or where there are opportunities for a future decision that we don't yet understand the full implications of around, for example, transition away from diesel use. We know that we are projecting out to 2054, 2050 carbon neutral. You've also got your own internal targets you're talking about. But we know at some stage we're going to need to do something to reduce our diesel use, for example, in the resource recovery and waste activity. We don't yet know what that looks like. We don't know what that decision will be or when it will be, but it's flagging those kind of things. So the table in the bottom right there is around identifying what is the issue that we might face, what do we think we might be doing, either a tangible action or a point for a future decision, how that benefits council and our communities, indicative costs, when are we doing it, and then that's underpinned by what are the assumptions we're making. Obviously looking out 30 years, there's a lot of uncertainty, so what are those assumptions? What are alternative options that council can consider at this time? So these are really flagging future decisions that council can make, and those will come to the fore as you move through additional LTP cycles. They will keep moving forward that 3-year period and being adjusted.
So that brings us to the end of our slide pack, and we will pass back to the head of the table.
Great, thank you for that. There'll be maybe some questions around the table on it, and maybe some other details that people want to raise. But first of all, you talked about the way that we're trying to bring together the different parts of infrastructure rather than just talking about water and talking about transport. Does that match in with the place-based way that we're trying to think about future Selwyn and our other planning? You know, are there things here that are about the geography and areas that we're talking to? Has that thinking been part of this?
Thank you. It is certainly a change in the direction. I wouldn't say that this strategy goes the whole way to answering that, and that will certainly set the direction for the next strategy in 3 years' time as that future Selwyn work develops further.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. I'll chip in on that. So we've started talking about the place-based recently, and so again, we're putting the foundations in place, knowing that LTPs have a finite time period, so it allows us to continue to build and refine our thinking and our planning and our strategy going into the future. So what's being described as an iterative document that allows us to be agile enough to change as we mature our thinking in a place-based approach. But what we've been very clear on is trying not to work in silos, which is why you see the addition of community facilities, etc., so that we're just not thinking about things in isolation. We're actually starting to look at the whole of our business. So we're really pleased to make that transition in this iteration of the infrastructure strategy.
Thank you. This might be a question that's more about the funding piece that comes next, but the use of depreciation rather than renewal funding and rebalancing where we're funding that level of infrastructure into the future, and conversations around resurfacing of all the new roads that are here, and thinking about how we're going to fund whether it's new asphalt or chip seal roads. Where does that fit into this thinking in that 30-year infrastructure? And are those things that we are going to be dealing with well in the next 10 years, or are they those 11-year bumps that we're still saying, well, I'll just make it happen in year 12?
Yes, I know when I first started council, the way that renewals was funded was looking over a 20-year period. And I suppose over the last little while, we've extended that out to 30 years. So instead of funding depreciation as and complete, we've looked out 30 years now to match the infrastructure strategy, and we've funded the renewals for that. I think there will be a discussion, and possibly at the next LTP, about funding depreciation fully. And yeah, that is probably more of a matter for the finance strategy than this particular document.
Cool, thank you. And the One Water strategy that's been, is a long way through, not quite complete. How much of a part has that played in the development of the Five Waters part that's here?
Yes, the One Water strategy has definitely influenced the preparation of the long-term plan for our asset manager water services, and also this infrastructure strategy. So although the strategy hasn't been adopted yet, the work that's been done on that work has influenced what we have put in this document.
Cool. Deborah.
Thank you. Look, just to follow on from what our mayor's just said, can I go back to central government? And central government have actually told councils who are really concerned about their rate rises to concentrate on their core services. Can you please explain what you would term in this infrastructure strategy? Is there anything outside or anything that trumps the core services or the value of the core services that you have in your diagram on the activities of the infrastructure?
Sorry, I'm actually going to chip in. What is the directive? Sorry, what is the directive that you says come from central government?
It's not so much a directive, but it's from the minister on the radio, on TV, and it was a comment that was actually made with regards to councils that are worried about their increasing rates perspective. That perhaps they needed to concentrate on what their core values or issues are, right? And I just wondered whether in our infrastructure strategy, have we actually considered that level of detail, I guess, with regards to what do we value as an infrastructure? Do we value our water over roading? Do we value our water over community services? Is it all the same?
Yeah, and part of the challenge is that in the current legislation, we're guided by the four well-beings, which in terms of defining what core business is, core business really does fall under the four well-beings, which gives council as much responsibility for social, economic, etc. But I will let Murray speak to his thinking around the infrastructure.
I think you've stolen my thunder, actually, Sharon, a wee bit. I was just whispering to Tim. I think the four well-beings is where I was going to land with that answer. So yes, water is an element of life, and transport, we can't get anywhere without that. But what will this place be if we didn't have community facilities? So I think what we've landed on is those key infrastructure that Selwyn provides to meet those four well-beings.
No, sorry, I just add in terms of the discussions that we've had about the priorities. I think the very nature of the fact that the infrastructure conversations that are going out there are probably significantly more limited than previous years shows a reflection in our potential LTP consultation document going out, when we've certainly narrowed the discussion about investments into new builds, etc. So and we've certainly heard that from the community in the pre-LTP feedback around that shift necessarily away from community services into one of connection, public transport, etc. So I think our LTP is starting to shape in that direction.
Thanks, Deborah. Shane.
Tēnā koe, Sam. Kei te wiritanga o te kaihui te waka. Tēnā rā tātou katoa. Thank you very much for the report, the war report. And it's actually giving me nightmares. I mean, this is the kind of the pointy end of the governance, really, isn't it? And it's I'm having flashbacks to the last LTP and the dizzying effects of all the reports and the weight of responsibility that it holds in a governance position like this. Certainly, the report that you've spoken to is an indication of whether we've got things right. And I guess the word, Murray, you said it was a bow wave, and being mindful of the fact that we've got a large amount of infrastructure that requires a large amount of operational expenditure and renewals and maintenance, and have we got the mix right of it going out the other end in projects and services to the running and maintenance of that infrastructure. So being mindful and aware of what we've got in front of us, ensuring that there may be rationalisation, I guess, when it comes to the pointy end of making some of the big decisions that we've got to make. On page 8, annual report produced every year lets you know whether council did what it said it was going to do. I think that's the most important part of it. And how do we are we measuring that correctly? Are we doing what we're saying we're going to do? And if not, is it moving too far, the scale too far ahead to achieve capital expenditure to meet regulatory requirements? And I had one more question, sorry, if that was a question. It was carbon reduction, actually, and it was just around waste minimisation. There's the opportunity to use some of that extra waste minimisation to contribute to probably a long bow to draw, but to various councils' carbon reduction. And it may be not appropriate to answer in this forum, but I just thought I'd ask why you mentioned it.
Yeah, in terms of reporting on how well we are achieving the aspirations of the plan. So every year we have an annual report. So that will be coming to council, no doubt. August, September type of time in the year, looking back on the year that's been. So that's how we report on that. So we're just recognising that reporting function. In terms of carbon minimisation, a lot of it is with our maintenance contractors, our management network contractors. So it's talking to the Cord and the HEBs of this world to see how we can reduce that diesel use for providing our services.
I guess the reason behind my question is really when we get to the pointy end of the decision making, don't be afraid to as we ride this bow wave of growth and huge growth into the district, we may need to potentially pause and have a look and have a reflect to catch up. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Grant.
An apology. I haven't read the infrastructure strategy. Where was it sent to us? Is it in diligent? Is it?
No, it's not. Yeah. It's not there. It's in the resource centre. There's another one in the resource centre, which is a different document.
Just, I would have read it, but I wasn't sure. When you said it was here, I thought it would be attached to this document. So, sorry, I haven't read it, but I would have read it.
It was provided as part of the pre-reading pack with the financial strategy and the policies and.
Apologies, I didn't see it.
I would just say that it's a working draft. It's almost there, but there's room for comment, so we can.
It's in diligent and resources.
I believe so. Yeah. So we're quite pleased to take comments post this meeting as well.
Second question is, given the annual 3-year return period, what do you do around the existing projects within the LTP? Do you just apply a flat inflation number and hand it over to the finance team, or do you go back and individually review the projects through war infrastructure and say new technology or pricing that particular is significantly different and apply it to the LTP?
No, so we start from scratch each time. We've got the information we've done the previous infrastructure strategy, but we look at it afresh each time. So we don't just apply an inflationary number to it. We actually go through and put out the budgets. A lot's changed even in 3 years for us. We have had a number of private plan changes, which have meant intersection upgrades for transportation, new water treatment plants are required. So every 3 years we do take a fresh look at that.
So given we've got this project review facility going on now, how close are we getting with our budgeting process to actual delivery? When we go back and do our project reviews, are we getting pretty close? Is our budgeting pretty much to delivery cost?
So is that in terms of the accuracy of our?
Yeah, the accuracy of our projections, because that's what we're concerned about, obviously. We're all sitting here going, having been a councillor here, I don't think I've ever seen a project come in on time on budget. Generally, most times we're always looking for budget extensions. And so when you're saying, well, the gross overall is 16% rates increase, the likelihood of what the real increase might be when it's delivered could be significantly more. And what I'm asking is the confidence in the numbers that you've got in the LTP, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose there's a number of parts to that question. In terms of capital delivery, in terms of the restructure, we've now got a dedicated team, the Capital Works team that focuses on that, as opposed to having project managers spread across the organisation. So that's something we have put in. Just looking towards the front in case someone turned me off intentionally. It's like, yeah, so we have set up that Capital Works team to focus on that capital delivery. There's been a large amount of effort put into making sure we have the estimates pulled together by QSs and engineering estimates and things like that. So a lot more work has been put into that rigour to make sure those budgets are accurate and the projects are deliverable.
I'm taking you've got a high degree of confidence in the numbers.
Yep, yes.
I guess a question for the CEO, I suppose. You talked about 4 well-beings being legislated. My understanding was that 4 well-beings were legislated as a piece of legislation, but how it's interpreted and delivered is up to us as governors.
In terms of the guidance around the legislation of 4 well-beings, absolutely, at the end of the day, the governors have the ultimate decision, but it's pretty clear in the legislation that the 4 well-beings are considered equal in terms of it's as important around the cultural, the environmental. Naturally, if you as governors decide that you want to take a completely different route, then obviously we will take your guidance. But as the legislation
you might put
stands,
1 ply in the toilet rather than 4 ply.
So say again.
Oh, well.
Maybe it's a good job I didn't hear that, Grant.
Sophie.
Yeah, my question is more around, so it sounds as though not everybody managed to find where the infrastructure strategy is. So originally the question was going to be, are we going to have a chance to go through the document and just have a look at the different pages in there? And now I'm thinking that that's probably fairly essential if some people haven't actually had a look at it. Or are we just looking at these slides and then moving on to the finance strategy? Because it would be good to have a bit of a run through of the actual strategy document.
I would say that if we've got the time, that we should put the strategy up and go through it, given that not everybody has been able to find it.
If you're in the diligent in the resource centre, then long-term plan 24-34, and then it's under pre-reading on the 14th of February.
So I think it's a different document.
It is 88 pages, so it will take us some time to work through page by page. So I do wonder if it's
Can you go to page 10 on your slide sheet there?
It's out by one number.
No, the slides that they're showing aren't the document. This is a summary of the document.
So they've got another introduction page. It's a blank page on our document. It's just out by one number.
So just go to page.
While we're sort of
I have a question.
trying to find it, I guess.
Hang on. Phil's talking at the moment.
Sorry, Phil. My apologies.
I've got a question about page 10, if you can get.
Can we move to? Are you guys throwing up the whole document? Is it the move?
We're just going to make sure that it was included in the diligent pack.
It is, yeah. Infrastructure strategy 2024 to 2054.
It's a different location to the.
Yeah, the email came.
Hang on, I'm still got my question going here. So.
Yeah, well, I'm just putting that I can see that.
So you can go to page 10 of your slide sheet. I have a question. So that one there, yep. So on page 663 under the major projects and decisions, doesn't line up on the one that's in the system here. And some of the things you got there about the year 1 to year 10, 24 to 34, actually is something that I've been looking for sometimes. So it's not the same document. It's not the same layout as you've got there. And where would I find that long-term plan year 1 to 10, 2024 to 2034? It's not in the table of contents that's on the document. So I've just hit my screen, it's just jumped, sorry.
Yeah, apologies for that. The contents table was extracted prior to a final change to the draft. So under major projects and decisions, there is now a total of years 1 to 30. It does not break down between years 1 to 10 and then years 11 to 30. Based on the framework where we identify the decision to be made and the alternative options, etc., that we ran through earlier, those have all been grouped together for the 30-year period. If you were looking to see specifically a 1 to 10 year, we can either include that as a summary or that would be based in the LTP.
I guess I'm trying to balance our current LTP with the document that we've got here where we're looking about 10 years. I appreciate this is a 30-year plan, but I don't know what we're doing over 10 years. And I've been asking you this a lot, and I don't know what's happening over 10 years. It's almost like it must be in this brain somewhere, or this brain over here somewhere, but I can't get into this brain here because I can't find the where it is.
Yeah, so the 10-year stuff will be is identifying the long-term plan and also the council's activity management plans. So we've been asked to present at the infrastructure and property meeting on Wednesday next week to go through the long-term plans. That's the first 10-year plan in more detail. So there's been I'll pass to Sharon.
Yeah, what we're doing, Kylie has just resent the email out that tells you where the document is, and it may well be that actually we extend the workshop next week. That also covers off a little bit more, so you've got time to read the document, and then that's probably a better opportunity to ask more detailed questions. So we'll extend the workshop next week. That enables to give you time to read the document through, and then we'll be able to answer any questions.
But just to reiterate, the 10-year plan, we will be going through it in detail as well as part of that workshop next week.
Good, Phil?
Well, yes and no. I guess as long as I just want something at some point that the next 10 years, what our plans are before we start considering what our new plans are.
That's the infrastructure strategy, the infrastructure Deborah's committee next week. Nicole, you had something? Grant, you had something as well?
Again, my apology for not being able to find this. And just as an add-on, I think it'd be really helpful if that had added to the briefing doc as one place, because clearly I'm behind the 8 ball a bit. Like I'm just surfing through it now, and I get to page 20 of the document and talk about strategic elements. Yeah. And it's got water race systems have been included. Well, obviously Lydia and I have a special interest in that. We probably would have been quite robust in that, perhaps, because that makes it different. If you're going to close or manage water races, that makes it a whole different kettle of fish, making it a strategic item. So there's been some significant changes in here, which I feel I'm probably not up to speed to comment on. So it's unfortunate. I'm sorry, some of it's my fault. I apologise for that.
That's look, and that's why I think with the resending of the link, point noted around making sure that it's absolutely clear for future, but we'll add on to time next week so we can have some good discussion onto that workshop.
If that part is next week now, is it worth, if we've got some comments, sending them through as a heads up?
Yes, that would be very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Megan.
I'll send my comments through then, because I'm not here next week, so I've got a couple of comments. I'll just email them to.
Why don't you share them now? Because we're here. This was on the agenda today to be discussed. So if you've got some things you'd like to say now.
Only a couple of comments. First of all, I wanted to say that this is an excellent document. it actually layered my thinking, and there were parts and there was gaps in my knowledge of, as we concentrated on the long-term plan, to go, well, but how does it all fit in the big picture? And this was the best document I've seen. And that's no criticism on anyone else's documents that's come before, but this was so helpful. So that's the first part. And I'm really keen for this to go out to the community and share, because I know when I engage with Tomitu, this is the parts that they will want to see and know about, because we do think in long-term thinking. My only other really minor comments on it were some of the finer detail in the referencing. So for example, on page 8 of mine, which is where it talks about mana whenua plans and guidance, and I just wondered whether it was now time to include our bicultural strategy there, knowing that it's referred to later, a couple of pages later in a little bit more detail, but it's kind of like the guiding steer now. And then another quick comment when it comes to the Greater Christchurch Planning Framework, and being mindful that this Friday potentially adopting a spatial plan, and the timing to include those documents into here to make it a little bit more relevant. So those little iterations, I presume, will just happen. Yep, great, thank you. And page 12, which it talked about, it shows the map and all of the identity of Selwyn. That was really helpful, and it has led me to go, well, I actually had no idea that dairy farming was actually rising in the district, and sheep and beef were reducing. So tiny little bits like that has really helped me to understand what's happening here. And so if I've understood it, then I think the community will understand it. So thank you.
Great, thank you for those comments.
Great, thank you. I think that brings us to the end of the infrastructure conversation. So we can move on to the next piece. Thank you.
The next section of the workshop relates to the finance strategy or financial strategy. And unlike the infrastructure strategy, we haven't taken the same approach. We haven't needed to sort of relook at the document and the structure as much. But to talk you through some of the changes that we have made, I have Craig.
Got choice of microphones. Okay, go and bring up this first slide. Thank you. So what is a financial strategy? So what a financial strategy is the council's plan to get us to the financial position we want to be in at the end of the 10-year period of the long-term plan. It brings together the impacts on the council's decisions on ratepayers and debt levels. The three critical components are the level of rate increases, the level of borrowing, and the balanced budget requirement, which is effectively revenue exceeds expenditure over the period of the long-term plan. Next slide. So the financial strategy facilitates prudent financial management, and it considers the factors that affect the community, such as population change, land use, changes, infrastructure needs, demands for services. And as I've said earlier, it includes limits on rates, limits on borrowings, and objectives and target returns on investments. I'm still on there, so yeah. So what is being prudent? So being careful and sensible, acting in the current and long-term interests of the community, also acting in line with sector norms and keeping within national benchmarks set through the Local Government Act, within rate and debt limits, ensuring revenue is greater than equal expenditure, as I said before. So as Jodie sort of alluded to earlier, the financial strategy for this long-term plan is really just a continuation of the financial strategy set during the 21-31 long-term plan. So what we want to sort of look at here is what is the council's views on rate increases, what is a reasonable level of debt, and then the the other part of it is, should debt be reducing by the end of the long-term plan, or just catching up with that increase in the debt limit, which has gone from 160% to 220%. I think that's pretty much an overview if you want to go through the document or any questions.
Just check that everybody's actually looked at the pre-reading.
Okay. Elizabeth.
Hi, it's a reworded version of my usual question. You talk about here keeping rates at a reasonable level and the level of borrowing under control. I guess I just want to really get a really clear picture. What is it as a council? How do we identify what actually is a reasonable level in our community? How are we guided by this? Is it a percentage of somebody's income, for example, pension? Is it a percentage of their property value? Is it because of the governance restrictions, or is it public submissions? How do we actually identify what is an achievable, affordable level for our ratepayers?
So in terms of rate increases, you'll be setting the limit of increases in any 1 year of long-term plan. So in our previous long-term plan, the limit was set at 6% as a flat rate across the whole period of the long-term plan. So you have the choice of setting that limit as a flat limit across every year of the plan, or you could set a limit for each individual year as a different limit each year, or you could set a limit for the first 3 years and then reduce that in the future. So in terms of what level is appropriate, so it would be, like you say, what is affordable to the community? That is the key question. So is what we're proposing a 16% increase in the first year and then an average of 8% affordable? That's the key question. Want to add something, Tim?
I wonder, councillors, if it would be useful to actually get into the document itself and have a look through it. It might be useful just to flick through it quickly. Would that be possible? Can we get it up on the screen at all?
Again, it's something I haven't seen this document before. It's not sent out. I can't even find it in the resource centre now.
It's there. There's a 14th of February 2024 pre-reading infrastructure and finance strategies.
So the 14th of February pre-reading infrastructure.
The one above that has infrastructure and finance strategies.
That one there.
Yeah, and then page 199.
It was sent on the 8th of February.
There is no 199. There's 221 pages, but there's two documents side by side.
Look, we apologise, councillors, if there's been not clear communication. It was sent out, perhaps it wasn't clear where it sat in the resource centre, which is a fairly new facility in Diligent. But I'm taking from the comments here that people haven't had the opportunity or the ability to have a look at the document before we get here today. Is that the case?
It's either corrupted, because actually the document says 221 pages, but there's two documents back to back, and neither of them is.
One of them shows the markups. That's the difference. Yeah. One of them shows the markups, the things that have changed.
If we could just take a 10-minute
adjournment, yes,
cup of tea, and then we'll get the document loaded up onto the screen, and we will take you through the document.
Okay, let's break.
I think the confusing part is there's three different.
No contents.
There's three different sections to look in for pre-reading.
Yeah, right.
Is what I found.
Yeah. Okay, so what's this one here? That's not there. That's not there, is it? No.
No.
Over to the three of you.
Cool, all good to go. Yes, Jodie's got the document up in front of you now. This is the untracked changes document. Would you rather go through the track changes document or the untracked change document?
Untracked.
Untracked?
Oh, I think untracked would be easier to see on the screen for everyone.
Okay, all good.
Well, what do councillors prefer to see?
Correct, we would see what the changes were.
Bracket, there we go.
All right, click forward. Okay. So good news is only 6 pages to look at, so it's not a large document. So this first page is really, most of the changes there are just sort of wording changes, with the exception of updating some financial information from the 2023 financial year end. So that's your net asset position, gross borrowing position at the end of June 2023, and so forth. The next paragraph down with all those track changes there. In the previous financial strategy, we were focused on, well, in the midst of the pandemic, it was only just right in the middle of it. So the emphasis on the paragraph there was more about what's the impact of the pandemic was, whereas now we're looking at the impact of the costs and the cost escalations as a result of the pandemic. Do you want to take questions on each page as we go through, or do you want to?
It's only 6 pages. How about you do the 6 pages, and then we'll come back to them.
So that's the first page. Next page. The next page down, we've also included on that left-hand column there just some commentary around the development of strategic investment strategy, which is currently underway. So that would look at reviewing our existing asset base and looking for divestment opportunities. So in this, I know the graph there is actually from our previous long-term plan, has been updated, but the graph that will be in the financial strategy at the moment won't take into account those potential divestment opportunities at this stage, because that strategy is still being worked through. On the right-hand side there, below the graph, we've got the rate limit increases. So what we're looking at there is getting some direction from the council of what those rate limits need to be. So in the first year of the plan as it sits, we're looking at sort of a 16% increase, average increase. So you'll be wanting to set the limit at least 16% in that first year, and then it's petering off and dropping down throughout the plan. So you could potentially set a limit for each year of the plan, or you could set a different limit for the first 3 years at 15, 16%, and then dropping down to 8 to 10% in the future years. That's where the rate limit setting comes into play. On to the next page. This page is just talking about the different rate types. So we've got general rate funded activities and you've got target rate funded activities. So this page is just explaining the general rate funded activities. Next page. And then targeted rate funded activities. The point I would also want to re-emphasise here is that the financial strategy is a 10-year document. It's not looking into that sort of other 20 years of the plan like the infrastructure strategy is. So the other key component is setting the borrowing limit. So next page. If you go one more page. So in a previous workshop, we'd looked to increase our net borrowing as a percentage of total revenue from current levels of 160% up to 220%. And that's taking into account our capital program and what is actually required to meet that program, and also looking at norms across the local government sector. And 220% is about right, and it allows us to complete the capital program. And then you've got some other debt limits there as well. Net interest as a percentage of total revenue, net interest as a percentage of rates revenue, and payback ratio. So not proposing any changes to those limits. It's just that net borrowing as a percentage of total revenue that needs to change. Next page here is looking at our different investments, so and the targeted return on those investments. It sort of comes to the end of the key pages of the document.
Sure.
And Craig, would it be fair to say that what's in the strategy are being proposed as basically what it looks like if all things remain the same, as opposed to it doesn't yet take into consideration what options we may gain over the next few years from the investment and disinvestment strategy, or say a economic development strategy, or other opportunities around how we utilise our assets?
Yes, that's
so that
correct.
is something that could still needs to be taken into consideration when thinking about this document.
Yes, that investment strategy is still being worked through.
So I think that's really important for councillors to understand, that it is what is there, as if this is how we continue on today, and yet does not take into account the opportunities that may come out in time for the next long-term plan, or come out for other annual plan opportunities, which then may make a different strategic approach, or offer different opportunities.
Shane.
Kia ora, Sam. Thank you. Thank you very much for the report. The scope for investment return increase or deliberation, is that included in that report? Sorry, I can't find it either. That's one question. But the second one is, and it's what you raised, Sharon, around the yet to be realised benefit of the investment and divestment policy. But page 30 of our long-term plan exists one already adopted in 2016, a commercial property investment. I believe it should at least refer to that that strategy and within that document. Important in investment and divestment is wrapped up in the summary of what that commercial property investment is. The council confirmed it will continue to investing in commercial properties where they will create income streams and contribute to positive community outcomes. We will include a total of 30 million over the first 6 years of this long-term plan for commercial investment. Any investment proposals will be subject to a comprehensive business case. But the purpose of it here, down the bottom, a key purpose of our property investment activity is to generate returns which are used to offset rates increases. I think it's a potential silver lining for some of all of our district out there to reflect on and have hope as we move through it.
So Shane, you're referring to the last long-term plan?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms, we're coming out with a new investment strategy, and that strategy is still in its formation, obviously, and it may come up to a different way of dealing with that. For instance, it may say the investment money derived from the investment strategy may not go to rates; it may go into a ring-fenced pool. So I think really including reference to the last investment strategy in some way probably preempts what's going to happen for the next few months when we land our new investment strategy. But Sharon, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I think it's going to be far more broader than what was in the previous LTP, Shane, in terms of it may not be just necessarily related to commercial property.
I guess in reference to it's important to track the timeline. It is an iteration or evolution of what this was, just to ensure that we have continuity.
So I think it's worthwhile making sure we've got the narrative correct around, and we'll find the wording that recognises that it's evolving from what it was in the previous to we're now looking at it more broadly. Is that what you're seeking?
Yes, yeah, measurable.
Yeah, thank you.
Megan.
Oh, kia ora. I love strategy discussions. I kind of think that's why we're here as governors, to actually talk about the strategy for the district. So when I look at, I've got a comment for page 211 on my agenda pack, which I think is your introduction, the introduction page. And in the introduction, it's the scene setting where we go, what are all the really big external factors that are going to impact on or influence council finances. And I see the reference to COVID-19 and also the global economy, and I'm in two minds whether or not we should also be including the impact of central government reform and policy changes, because that will impact on finances. However, then I go, why am I in two minds about it? Because I also go, at the same time, we actually do have a really clear role and function outlined in legislation that does take a really long time to change. And so we shouldn't be responding to just central government rhetoric. So that's why I'm in two minds, but I still think it actually does really impact on our finances. So I'm putting it out there to just put it for your consideration.
No, thank you. That's noted. I guess we can include something along those lines as you suggested. I think local councils are always going to be at the whim of central government. I think it's appropriate to acknowledge.
And I had one more. This is a question. And I see that you've added, that we've added into the equity, our interest in Orion and Court has been added. And it's a question about CPW. My understanding is that we don't have any financial equity in CPW, and instead the financial returns go to maybe the farmer members. But is there any financial benefit from being involved in CPW?
Just note that this conversation might conflict. Grant and council does own shares in CPW Limited for the water that's supplied to our farms that we lease.
We get financial returns, so it should be here or not?
We get a water return.
Sorry.
Deborah. No, Sophie's first.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, mine was more just a random question that may have already been covered. The graphs all refer to the previous financial strategy, so I'm presuming they're going to get updated for the new one. Thank you.
Deborah.
With regards to CPW, I thought we had a minimum amount of shares in CPW so they could become a requiring authority. But we also structured underneath that the trust in a share arrangement with that, minimum. I think it might be, 1% or something, 4 shares or something like that. It was just with regards to that shareholding, and is it a significant shareholding that actually is caught by us and the rest of our CCOs, because it's not really a CCO. We just have a minimum amount of share, but we do have the responsibility of the trust.
The trust holds the consents. It's not a profit-making business. It's not providing money back into the space. I don't know, Craig, if you want to answer.
No, Deborah's correct. It's a very small shareholding we hold. It's like just related to the 2 farms and the water rights. Yeah, that's less than $500,000, I think. Memory.
Thank you. There's a couple of things on the graphs that are there, and like if we're going to be commenting on the stuff that's here, I think it's really great to see that net borrowing over time is dropping, and we're not just watching that match our increased limit over time, and it's going through the roof. So can you just talk to our borrowing over the 10 years and how you've structured that borrowing to ensure that there's that drop off at the end?
Yes, so that isn't the case. So that graph in there is the previous financial strategy. So based on the capital expenditure program and the way it's going at the moment, that is not dropping off. It's maybe slowing down by the end, but it's still progressing to catch up to that change in the limit from 160% to 220%. But as Sharon was saying earlier, there's that investment opportunity to maybe look at curving that off at the end.
Yeah, so I had a brief look at the graph this morning of where it's previously bell curved. It is continues on a trajectory, and again, that's partly what I was referencing is that it doesn't take into account any opportunity. So I think we need to perhaps share that information that you showed me this morning, Craig.
And the number that we've got as a hard line that was 6 and is now 20. Is there a way that we could have that? I mean, I would hate to see us break 20 or have the need to break 20 as the maximum rates increase average in any one year. But there are councils around the country at the moment who are talking 30s. And so without wanting to go back through, I feel like last year we artificially held our rates lower than we should have to meet a decision that we'd made 3 years earlier without full information. And if we hadn't had that 6% limit last year, we would have made a better decision and a more informed decision for our community about not having to have the 16 this year, because we would have been catching up from a higher number already. I'd hate to see us in 2 years' time have to run through that same space and then not have to make a lower decision than we should and have to catch it up over time, because they're always more expensive to catch up. So is there a way of setting that to, is there an indice? Is there a, you know, because I mean, it's inflation that's driving a whole lot. It's the cost of doing things that's driving most of our lift. You know, there's a bit of catch up and there's some other things as well, but so much of it is caught up with everything's just more expensive to do now than it was a couple of years ago. And so could we connect that number to the cost of construction or one of the council related inflation figures? That means it will actually change over time. We're not going to see the hard figure. We're going to be able to understand year on year what the cost changes have been in that time, but it gives our community some confidence that we're not just going to set it at 20, and even if it only needs to be 2, we're going to keep going at 20, but it's going to move with the inflation factors that our council faces.
Yeah, so there's multiple options. Yeah, there's, like we've done in the past, we've just had that 6% every year on year. There's the option of setting the limit specifically for each individual year of the plan, or there's a possibility of setting the first 3 years at a higher level. Then once that rate increases, well, you've caught up with your rates income, you might be able to reduce the rate level limit for the further 7 years, or there's the ability to set it to CPI or LGCI plus a percentage. Some other councils do that. You maybe, I think.
Has that been investigated, and like what would that mean for our numbers here?
Not at this stage.
Could we have a 16?
We can have a look at it, but it would have to also align or meet the projected increases in the rates based on our rate examples at the moment. So you've got to set the limit outside of that, obviously, but we can look at that if you want to match to a cost index.
It just feels like we're picking a number artificially to match the first number in our annual plan rather than thinking about what changes might take place over the 10 years. So I'd be interested in seeing if those other LGCI could fit this.
Yeah, and go away and do that. Yeah.
Thanks. Grant.
It's a good point you raised there, Sam, because I suppose it's an opportunity for us to, rather than focus on the near term, and I clearly recall the 6% discussion. It was when Greg Bell was here, it was very strident, and we wanted to see the debt curve turn down. But I suppose our role is to look at the macro picture, and it is concerning that us as an organisation have gone from almost a zero debt entity to an entity which is trending to a significant debt portfolio, and hasn't had any track record of being able to hit its budgets or be able to control its expenditure. That's just the honest truth, because the history tells us that. So you were asking about, you know, ways of methodology. I suppose what we might want to reflect is on a population basis or a rateable unit basis, our debt to rateable unit or debt to population. So we can, because we suffered that explosive growth, let's index that and see how it is to a rating unit or to a population. It may give us a better picture, a more robust idea of how we're tracking compared to other entities and compared to ourselves. But I am extremely concerned, like Greg Bell was, the ex-CFO when he was here, that we do manage to get the debt curve at least under control, because as you say, Craig, but I mean, that we can live with that with comfort if it aligns with the growth underneath it. If the rateable units are increasing at the same rate and the debt per capita or debt per rating unit is comparatively the same or turning down, you get a degree of comfort that this is not woe is me and put the lifeboats out, but this is because we are a growth council and our population is exploding and we have the population density or data to actually support that rating burden. So that's probably somewhere on the way I'd like to see. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a good idea. We can go away and look at the comparatives to the cost indices and the population relatively. Yeah.
And that probably raises, I talked to Sharon about trying to understand the cost of growth for our district. Like, what is every house that comes? What is the cost, and whether it's the debt portion of that grant, but what is the cost to our community of growth? And for every house that comes in, how much is everyone else funding things that are happening? And we know that there's an amount of development contributions that fund certain things, but actually just the lift and amenity means we're all paying more for those things. So some analysis on that, Sharon's going to undertake. Lydia.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be actually a really great space to go in and be a bit more transparent with our people around what our debt is and the ratio per household or per person. I guess I'm looking at the forecast net borrowing, but I'm also aware that it is last LTP. So obviously there's some changes, and Sharon, you touched on that you've seen different charts.
Oh, just
already.
this morning, Lydia.
Yeah.
So, and again, that's I've made a note that that was fresh that I saw this morning. We need to share it with councillors. We need to share it with the context to make sure that you understand. So we'll be doing that.
So on those new charts, are you? I guess I'm asking if you our net borrowing and how much contingency we have looking into this LTP, because it makes me a little bit uncomfortable from what I see here.
So that limits increased from 106% to 220%, and previously it was curving downwards, that downwards trajectory. So it's not doing that anymore, as I've said. It's sort of tracking that 220% and catching up with it and getting quite close by the end of the 10-year plan. So yeah, so quite a different model. So
Okay, I look forward to seeing it.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Is this the right time to ask about the divestment strategy? Right person, right time?
There'll be some workshops coming to the council to talk about that in the near future. So I don't know how much we can share here.
Okay, I'll throw
outside of
you a
that, but
few
it's still
questions here,
doing the best.
Okay. So what is the ultimate purpose of the divestment strategy? What primarily are we looking at divesting? Are we particularly looking here at the town halls that are not being used? And the reasons behind it, is it because of the cost to the 2035 requirements? Is it because of the ongoing annual cost to keep them? Just wanting to get my head around that. Thanks.
That'll be one of the first questions that that the council has to decide on. What is the purpose of a financial strategy? What's the vision? So these are all questions that they're good questions, but they'll be dealt with in a workshop in the next couple of weeks, I think. Sharon, I'm not too sure when the first one is.
Yeah, well, I was just going to jump in. It is. It would be good business practice for this council to have an investment and divestment strategy, and so this is new ground for us in terms of formulating a strategy. And there'll be a series of workshops put into your diary to work through with the company that we've engaged.
And we had some strategic asset conversation around Court and Orion. And through this long-term plan, is there any restriction on us trading any of our CCO or investment holdings through this financial strategy?
So that's not really included in the financial strategy. That's the strategic investment strategy, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the answer is no, Sam.
I'll just add on to that last comment. Another thing that would be really helpful for us, or particularly me, was a pie graph of the composition of the debt we've got. You know, where does it lie? Is it wastewater? Is it community centres? Where does it's all capex debt, isn't it? There's no opex debt in it. So let's understand where it lies.
Yeah, we can do that. Thanks.
Sophie?
Yeah, I was just wondering whether if we're going to sort of explain a bit more about debt per household and all that sort of stuff, and then Grant's raised before about the track record of how projects expenditure goes and all that sort of thing, whether it's worth also mentioning that, you know, the last few years and continuing, actually, the way that council is structured has changed. And in terms of resourcing for making sure that those sums are done and project managed and everything else, you know, we have a really good team, and just making sure that everybody realises the numbers haven't been plucked out of the air, basically.
Thank you. Any further questions on the financial strategy? No. Jody, back to you.
This is not going.
Thank you, Sam and Jan. The last part of this workshop is to do with the LTP policy revisions that we've undertaken since December 2023. The subject matter experts on the policies are just starting to make their way down now. But I'll do a brief introduction and a summary of sort of the work that we've done. There'll be an opportunity to ask specific questions on each individual policy as we go through. Or at the end, Sam, it's sort of, I'll take your direction as to how you'd like to field the questions. So just as a bit of a summary, just refresh memories around how we go about creating the LTP and the role of the policy review process in that. This slide sort of depicts where we're currently at in the development of the LTP process and where policies feed into that. So at the moment, we are at the develop the consultation document stage, as we all know. We're busy writing the consultation document. We're also going through an audit process at this point in time of the consultation document as well. So our auditors are currently on site undertaking an audit. And part of writing the consultation document is involves the production and revision of policies that go into the LTP or inform some of the decisions around the LTP. So to recap the policies that we have reviewed as part of the LTP, we have reviewed, this slide depicts the policies that are legislatively required, that are critical to LTP development and that contribute to the LT story in some way, but if they haven't been reviewed, then they're not necessarily critical, they're not necessarily, they might contribute to our LTP story, but they're not critical. We have some discretion as to whether we include them or not. And those include the lump sum policy, which was introduced in the last LTP, but there's no changes to that. And we also have a new policy rating of Māori freehold land, which is essentially a separation of content that was in the rates of emission policy. And that is now going into a separate policy as well. So there are specific policies that are legislatively required that we have to include in the LTP and make available as part of supporting documentation for the consultation document. And that is the significance and engagement policy and the revenue and financing policy. Those are ones that we definitely have to include in the LTP. So the pre-reading pack that you've been provided provides track change versions and clean versions of policies that have had amendments since December 2023. There are a number of policies that are currently going through a legislative compliance review, and there are a number of financial policies. So we don't have any changes to present to you on those at this point in time, but they will be coming. We anticipate that review will be completed by the end of February. So this slide just summarises the changes that have been made to two non-financial policies, which are the significance and engagement policy and the Māori contribution to council decision-making policy. The significance and engagement policy since December 2023 underwent a external legislative compliance review, and the current version in the pack with the track changes essentially shows how that advice has been incorporated. Essentially, the main changes are to do with, there's a number of grammatical changes, but there's also a inclusion of CORD within the strategic assets as in response to one of the questions that one of the points the councillor made at the last workshop. So we considered that and included CORD. And we also have, as part of doing that exercise of incorporating CORD, we sought advice around what we should be looking for in terms of including the list of what we should include in the list of strategic assets. And going forward, we now have some helpful guidance around how we can decide that coming up to the next LTP. Regarding the Māori contribution to council decision making, we have made a number of reviews with the assistance of Te Pou Mataho, and we currently have that policy we've provided it to Te Pou Mataho to make contact with Runaka, and we're awaiting that feedback currently. Moving on to the financial policies, the only policy in the financial space that's had sort of a review undertaken and more significant changes undertaken since December 2023 is the development contributions policy. So there are a number of changes that we've made to that policy, which are listed there, but that is also going through a legislative compliance review. So there may be further changes to that once we have that review completed toward the end of this month. If you would like, we can run through the individual changes in the pre-reading pack.
I've got a query.
Yes, please, Jodie.
I'm just bringing up the track changes version. I would assume that's the preference. We'd like to run through those.
Yeah.
Yep. Right. So for this policy, there's no major changes to the introduction section. There are some changes to the second page of the policy, mostly grammatical in nature. The next page, there are probably of note is the inclusion of district or region upon advice from external legal providers. It was anticipated by them that they didn't believe that council probably wished to restrict their influence just to the district, but they'd also like consideration given to the region. The next significant changes to run through are on the next page. There's not so much of an impact with those changes. Most of them are a clarification and grammatical in nature. This page, just one of the key changes on this page is essentially just ensuring that when we are assessing the level of significance, that there are certain things such as urgency that will be considered as well, which may impact the application of the policy. Of note under section.
Sorry, do you want us to interrupt as we go along, or just how do you want to run this?
I think just finish through the changes that are here, then we'll come back through them. Yep.
Yeah, I'm summarizing sort of the key ones that I've picked out in the summary document. In this table here, what we have retained is a reference to the fact that if we are divesting ourselves of facilities or abandoning them, then that's also an item that we will likely consult on. And that was retained from a previous version of the policy and had been excluded in iterations, but has been reintroduced in this final version here. And those are essentially a very high overview of the key changes to this policy. Happy to take questions.
Deborah.
Thank you. Just going to go and reflect back on the significance policy. And thanks very much, Megan, for bringing up CPW, because it's made me think that if we have a trust that owns the resource consents for the water, would that ensure for that community to ensure that they could not, a council could not make a decision if CPW Limited wanted to actually tell us that they wanted to sell the asset and we owned the consents? Where would that sit us with our significance policy? Would we be entrapped because the trust owns the consents? It's just a thought. Where does it sit within our significance policy? Does it sit outside? I'm talking the trust here as the consent holder.
Consents, as a rule, run with the activity. And Bob, you might have a view on this, but my understanding is that a consent would run with the activity itself. So an activity has got a particular consent. Bob, you got a view on that?
I think you're on the right of the track. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that just because an activity, you wouldn't be able to separate the resource consent from the activity unless the consent holder withdrew the consent or surrendered it.
I guess that's where I'm coming from with regards to the trust being the consent holder. That has an impact on two ways, right? With regards to the significant policy requiring some form of community consultation. And the community consultation would be for the users of that resource, but also the beneficiaries from the trust resources.
Sorry, Deborah, I'm just going to...
Sorry.
I just want to check something with the room. Sorry.
Okay.
And this is, Grant, just around your involvement in the conversation around conflict, because I just think if we're discussing a strategic nature of a consent that has flow-on effects to the company that runs those consents, and Grant's the chairperson of the company, I just think we're in dangerous, in an interesting space, and I'd just seek the guidance from the room around how you'd like to handle this matter, and whether it might be better, Grant, if you weren't part of this conversation.
I'm happy to do so, but note this is a live streamed meeting. So you're talking in public, so I can stand out there, but I can watch it on my phone. So I'm happy to do so. But
I think just step back from the table and we'll just note the conflict. And
sorry. Apologies.
No, that's fine, Deborah.
I mean, it was just something that was a debate earlier that triggered my thoughts about, where do we sit with the trust as being basically under our significance policy, and any major changes that would consequently need community consultation. That's the cutoff with regards to the trust involvement. And I know we're a joint trust, I think, with Christchurch City Council. So it's just a question. And if we're not clear, can we get clarification on that as where it would sit in our significance policy?
Yeah, so it's, I was just going to say it's an interesting point, and I guess the question you're asking is whether the trust and or CPW should be a strategic asset. And that is something we perhaps could have a think about and come back. To be honest, I can't give you a straight answer here unless someone else has got a clear view, but I think it's something we might take some advice and think about.
Yeah, I would say let's just take it offline and have some advice and guidance, and we can follow up with Deborah offline around her specific request.
Thanks, Deborah. Shane.
Kia ora, Sam. Tēnā rā tātou katoa. E mihi ana e mana whenua, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Māori contribution to council decision making. Section 81 of the Local Government Act refers to Māori opportunity for decision making I just want to be sure, as I always have, as part of this council, ensure that all Māori have the opportunity to, although not explicit within the text here. I think it needs to at least be clear where and how, if not through, maybe not through special consultative, but certainly how a council will continue to honour the agreement through the Act and also to TTC. The second question was just clarification on page 20, amendment to community infrastructure DC catchments. If I'm removal of district-wide catchment, is that, to me, is that to provide a more targeted application?
I think
We're on a
we're
different
talking about the
policy.
significance.
Financial policy. Oh, sorry.
Yes, I think we've jumped ahead to something else we might touch on shortly.
Okay.
So
I
hold
believe
that
you're
thought.
talking, yeah, that's the development contributions policy, which we'll get to. Yeah.
Thank you. Megan.
I have a question around, and I don't know if it's on the slide, that's channels used for engagement. What I can't see captured in here is, so formal engagement is captured somewhere in the document around when we actually engage in those formal consultation processes, either under the LGA or the RMA. But one part, and being new to council, that I've become more aware of is some of the councillor-based community engagement, and it's more informal, might be going to a community meeting, etc. And I couldn't see really where that was reflected so that it would be transparent. That how do we actually do that? Like if we're going out to community meetings, is it expected that council staff would come with us? Like how is it captured in here? And how can it be transparent so everybody feels that either that is a mode to engage or not?
I have the slide up on screen of an extract of the policy, and I think this sort of explains the levels of of the different approaches and methodologies that we have. We don't have that level of detail in here, but I just want to check whether or not this is something that potentially might answer your question.
Perhaps, Megan, I could also assist. This policy is around how council makes its significant decisions. So it is a legislative requirement to have a engagement. It triggers a special consultative process. So it is this policy talks about significant decisions. And so there'll be a whole lot of other engagements that the council makes with its community and a whole range of issues in different ways. But this is specifically about decisions the council's making on significant decisions. So this policy identifies what is significant and what isn't, and then what triggers that sort of decision-making process, which is the special consultative process. So I hear what you're saying, but maybe that is discussed in other places in the council's long-term plan or its way it engages with community.
Okay, great. It would be good to capture it somewhere, because when I looked at that and I thought, well, I used two examples to run through my head. One was a recent whakaro where there was some community meetings, which is I thought a significant decision, and then going and engaging with Taumitu. So, but they're outside of legislative processes, so they're not captured.
So whakaro is going to be part of our long-term plan. So it is going to go through that special consultative process. But there'll be various points of engagement, but that in terms of the actual formal decision, if it's a significant decision, it has to go through that process, and that's what this policy is about.
I think that you've actually raised a really good question there, Megan, though, because this is not just a significant, it's not just engagement on significant decisions policy, it's our significance and our engagement policy. And this should identify the decisions that will be significant through to not very significant, and also our engagement based on whether that decision is significant or not very significant. And if we're missing the ways that we're going to engage with our community, even on the minor things, which might just be email, turn up somewhere and talk about something, it's not as formal. It would be good for this policy to actually talk about the way that will be captured, so at least our community can know and councillors can be aware of the type of engagement for low-level decision-making that we will have. And it might be communication rather than engagement, might be the wrong word for how we're going to talk to our community about the things, but communication will be a part of that.
I consider that. I can consider that after this and have a look at the policy. The policy does cover not just necessary matters of significance, but also other ways that we engage. And this is what this is what the on the screen behind you, this engagement scale is representing, depending on the level. These are the methodologies that council can use, how it engages with the community, not just on matters of significance, but also the engagement model that we can use for other decisions as well. But I can relook at the policy to see.
Section 4, sorry, Jodie, Section 4, how we consult and engage, sets out a range of different engagement types. So on page 40, I think.
We can use combinations potentially of what's on the diagram behind you as well, but not just wedded into one. As soon as the special consultative procedure is triggered, we have to follow that. And in the sense, this policy doesn't really apply because we have to follow the legislative special consultative procedure. But in other instances, this is the policy that we would follow for everything outside of that.
Yeah, and it's cool. It's just that the threshold's quite high, and underneath that, there's a whole range of different areas. And if we're just going to treat them all the same, that might not be quite appropriate. So if there's different ways of treating each of the layers that don't quite meet that special consultative procedure route, that's what we're asking. Grant.
Thanks for that, Sam, because it leads into the question that I raised earlier. I just seek clarity before it gets lost in the ether. On page 37, you've on the track changes, we've talked about including water race as strategic assets. I want to understand the implications of that. We've had a long-term project to rationalise and get to our future network status, which has been plodding along. By the change you've put here, will that make a material difference to the way that that is actually done? Will it just be a water race hearing like it was before, or will that actually notch it up about 5 or 6 levels and have a special consultation process with? What does it mean by putting it in here? What does it change?
I would suggest, in terms of, you're quite right, Grant, that there is a current process in place that has lagged in terms of time frame, and that process has been refreshed and brought back to life. I understand that there is a clear process, and that being in the significant engagement policy would not make any significant difference to the current process as it stands. And I don't think there's any suggestion to change the process dramatically.
No, I think that's correct. The current process would match that, or will be equal to that of the special consultative process, because it's submissions, people are able to lodge hearings, and there's a formal decision-making process. So it's the equivalent of what.
I think as long as it's not a material change, because there'd be a large section of the community would feel the drawbridge has been pulled up when the process is not finished. And if we can get that assurance that materially it'll be the same, I think I'd support it.
I just stood up as you started to talk, Tim. But I think with this policy, when it talks about significant asset, it talks about the asset as a whole and not in part. So for everything, if it's the water network or the water race network or the facilities network, if the significant asset is the whole, not the part. So you can close individual stretches of the water race. If you want to close the whole or all water race networks, then that will be a significant decision, and that will go out for under that significance policy, go out to consultation to the wider community.
Thank you. Shane.
Just quickly, for me, just maybe to provide some clarification for Megan's question. I don't know whether the appointed members are part of the engagement policy. I know from a council law perspective, we were a council hat, and then we were a community leaders hat, I guess. And that particular meeting was a community organised meeting, not a council organised meeting. So there's clarity around that. And as a councillor, you can, as a community member, can turn up, and or a council law. With the disestablishment of the community committees, there's no longer where there was the requirement to turn up to the whatever they are now, the existing community meetings, where there was goodwill to turn up to keep a finger on the pulse, so to speak. But I think raised a really good point, Megan, around engagement responsibilities around appointed members and what is the appropriate, also with mana whenua, but through engagement of an appointed member, because I shared the information for information and a tricky space, I guess. So clarity around that will provide more protection for those that will attend. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. I think the hard thing is as soon as a councillor stands up the front of a meeting, it becomes a council meeting. So it doesn't really matter who calls a meeting or who starts it, but if one of us stands at the front, that blows that line pretty quick. A question that's in here for me on page 37 is why Cord and Orion remain as strategic assets. And I would think that at a time when we're trying to consider our investments and think about the future of flexibility and hold ourselves not into tying ourselves up right now with those, that we shouldn't be having them in here. And how might we, can you just explain to me the rationale why they're here, and is there another way of doing it so that they are not here?
I believe Orion was in the previous iteration of the policy, which explains why it's here currently. Cord was an introduction based on some of the advice that we had. There's sort of there's a matrix of essentially council has some the strategic assets are clearly defined in the Local Government Act. So there's a very clear definition around what a strategic asset actually is. And the advice that we have received goes into a bit of detail, provides us with some guidance around how we might want to think about some of the holdings that we have. And in terms of Cord, in response to the last workshop where it was raised where the Cord should be, that it looked as though, in terms of the advice that we received, that we could include Cord as part of our strategic assets in accordance with the advice that we had received. But we can re-look at that. We have some discretion as to what we do count as a strategic asset, and essentially, does it help council performance functions and responsibilities?
And I'm not saying they're great and we don't want them, but right now we're trying to come up with our investment strategy, and a whole lot of our investment dollars are tied up in those two companies.
We can relook at the lists that are in here again with the advice that we've received.
So can we use the long-term plan as a way of saying, of opening the conversation with the community to give us the flexibility to make decisions without having to go back through community consultation in 12 months' time or 24 months' time on a particular transfer?
This might be a timing issue in terms of this iteration of the LTP, because we are just getting into the throes of developing the investment and disinvestment strategy. That might be, once we understand what the strategy is that council desire, it may well be that any changes come across in the next iteration of the LTP rather than this one, because then we have a very clear strategy. I don't know that it could be just purely timing, but again, we have the current discretion to be able to take it out, and if councillors guide us down that direction, that would then continue to leave flexibility for conversations, then equally we can do that too.
Other councillors have a view of, do we want the flexibility or do you want the certainty of knowing that there's a big process to go through should we want to shift out of either Cord or Orion in part or in whole? Shane?
I had a question about something else. I'm still thinking about your question, Sam, but it was around the timelines.
Sorry, I'll just finish this up then. Yep. Does anyone have a view as to whether it matters? Yep.
I like the flexibility. I think at the stage we are in this council, we need to have our options open and be able to move, especially when we're looking at our investment strategies in the future. So I'd like to see some flexibility in that.
Thanks, Megan.
I think that is a significant asset because we're deriving good income from it. So it actually does hit the mark. The question, although can the conversation be tied and linked into other processes like the LTP, like you mentioned, or the annual plan? And if it can be, then great. But I do think it's significant.
Yes.
So if it's significant, it should stay.
Sam, we do have legal advice about what is significant and what isn't. I haven't read it recently or seen it, so perhaps we could just review that and come back and
It's
advise the
not about
council.
whether it's significant. They are significant. It's whether we can use this process through the long-term plan to provide us the flexibility to make decisions over the next 12 or 24 months around the future of our investment in those spots without having to go through another whole process at the end of that. And if we can, I think we should open that door. And if we can't, that's fine. We'll just deal with it in 12 or 24 months' time. But if we can't decide it now, let's come back to it.
I think we just need to get some further advice and consider that, if that's okay.
Shane.
Yeah, I was going to say that I'm happy for it to stay in there. It's good practice and of significant value, but it impinges, it really leveraged off the question I was going to ask around the audit, the external audit that's currently part of the process, and that might be the advice that you may receive, but where is it, when will that report be attached to a future briefing?
The audit process?
Yeah.
So currently they're ordering our consultation document, and some material relating to that. And so the outcomes of the audit will be reported back in due course, I presume, Jody.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jody. Next thing. Marietta.
The next policy we have to go through in detail is the Māori contribution to council decision-making processes policy. So this is a policy that's been developed or co-developed with Te Pou Mataho, and currently we have asked, we're going through a process of asking Runaka for their feedback on this particular document. It's on page 52. The track change version is on page 52 of the pre-reading pack. So the changes largely include reference to the bicultural strategy, some amendments to the 4 POs to describe them consistently with what is in other documentation, correction of the correction of the statement around Runaka under the Acknowledging Mana Whenua and Kaitiaki subheading. And the other changes of note are really around a slight expansion of the key areas of decision-making of interest to Runaka. So we've included, after discussion, the provision of cultural narratives and the use and application of Māori names within the district and any other matters identified as a priority to Runaka. So those have been added in as items that where council should be actively engaging with Mana Whenua on. And the only other change, which is probably worth bringing to your attention, is in the policy review period heading, just that should there be any changes of any amendments to existing relationship agreements or new relationship agreements, then this is something that might also trigger a review of this particular policy document.
Thank you. Shane, you had something earlier?
Yeah, kia ora. Remihi ana kia koutou. E whaia. And thanks for the report. I agree with the kōrero here. And just going back to my original question around the legislation, Section 81 for an opportunity for Māori to have a voice, and would it be considered for further consideration? To me, mana whenua wrap their cloak around, Māori, everybody, and then can have a voice through. So for consideration, would an addition perhaps be all Māori have the opportunity to engage with council throughout, whether it needs to be a different avenue or through these decision-making powers through mana whenua. I think further consideration needs to be made because it's been something that I've been passionate about and we've discussed in this chambers many a time. So, and to ensure that council is doing its job and sticking to the legislation for all Māori to be considered. So it might be a bit of a more kōrero later on, but I would really, I think it would be a good thing to have the word Māori or tangata whenua wrapped up in that, and have an engagement through to that fits the Act, responsibilities, but also respects mana whenua.
Thank you. This was something that we did discuss, that I have discussed with a member of Te Taho, and we did go back and forth as to whether or not the scope of the policy was broad enough to capture the wording of the legislation or not, and I'm happy to reconsider that.
Oh, well, mana te mana, a kia ora e whaia.
Kia ora e te whānau, ai ka pai rā. So yeah, we'll take it back and we'll have a look at that and then bring it back to you. Ka pai rā.
Ka pai.
Thank you. Is that all, Shane? Yep. Sorry, the light was on there. Deborah.
I'm going to have to be excused, but I've just gone back to the development contributions policy and I've just looked at the maps. Oh, you haven't come to that yet? I'm ahead of myself, so I'll just wait for that on there.
Okay. Megan.
Kia ora. So when I looked at this, I looked at it through the lens of what are all of the legislative requirements to consult and engage with mana whenua and Māori, and with the RMA being really prescriptive as to who holds voice in which spaces. So that was the lens I brought to it. On page 53 of the policy, and it runs into 54, it talks about the key areas of decision-making of interest to Runanga. And when I looked at that, I do agree with the addition of provision of cultural narratives. However, when I look at the page before it, and it talks about the natural resources, and it just says natural resource management, and yet that is probably the key area that we engage in on a daily basis. So we provide mana whenua advisory reports into resource consents. For bigger resource consents, we do cultural impact statements. We advise into the district plan changes, the whole RMA framework. And so when I go, if it's high level, yes, we say natural resource management, but to keep on the next page about the cultural narratives and keep it high level, then I ask myself, well, what is it that we're actually doing? And it's actually providing or having opportunities to assert tino rangatiratanga across the district, of which cultural narratives are one mechanism to do it. So I think we either go with one or the other. We either go natural resource engagement, which includes and then, or we go lift up cultural narratives to be about tino rangatiratanga, of which cultural narrative is an example. But great policy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll chat with Te Taho about how we incorporate that fully. Thank you.
Shay.
Just two more things. Thank you, kura motua. And I think it's wonderful that we're good partners, good partnership, and especially the reo and the bicultural strategy. Because what's really important is actually living it and ensuring that the community is part of it and woven through it. And actually, I'm glad. Well, perhaps there was mana whenua present at the community meeting last week, and I just want to commend Grant, Councillor Miller, for some contentious issues that came up that made me quite uncomfortable. But it's part of the fabric that we live in, and it's also part of the gap that needs to be shortened through this strategy of engagement and ensuring that it's part of the normal, and that'll happen over time, particularly the demographic. But I think it's great to have policies and words, but actually embedding it into the community is the most important part. Secondly, there was I would hope there would be an opportunity within that policy, what it is, an avenue for engagement of iwi Māori to the community amendment bill Sale and Alcohol Act. If there's an opportunity for that to be somewhere in there so that mana whenua are part of the engagement process moving forward in the final reading of that Community Amendment Act. The amendment to community consultation, sorry, through the Sale and Alcohol Liquor Act.
Are you, just so I'm clear, are you suggesting that maybe in terms of the key areas of decision-making interest, we include a reference to legislative
yes.
engagement processes?
Yep. Well, it's up for consideration, but yeah, I think that would be a good one to have in there.
So just to clarify everything, this is just like a snippet shot, and with the snippet shot then we've got the appendices of the actual acts, the roles and responsibilities, blah blah blah. What we wanted to do is make the document more readable for whānau, anyone, to understand where they fit, and then from there there'd be openings of links for whānau to go into the appendix to have a look on where the direction they should be going to, and what act, what bill, what legislative component that they can utilise as well. But it was about being a little less wordy and more active so that whānau could participate.
And we have tried to keep this quite at a high principles-based level as well. So some of that detail won't necessarily be explicit in here, but we're trying to allow for that detail to be considered through the way that we try to work the policy.
Thanks. At the very front end, it's talked about the Local Government Act, and I'm wondering, you might have just answered that by saying that in the appendices there's other things, because the Resource Management Act obviously is one area that our council is heavily involved in, and there's other rules around engagement that we need to make sure that we continue to follow there. So that's covered in this policy. It's just stored somewhere else.
Yeah, it was the appendices would make the document very, very long, so we haven't changed those since last version. So they're not necessarily part of the reading pack or the version that you're seeing, but there will be links and hyperlinks within the document in its final form that will help people navigate the document much better.
It made it very clinical. Put your microphone on. Oh, it was a document that was very clinical, and you wanted the document to be used and utilised so anyone could pick it up.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
No further questions. I'll move on to the next policy. We do have the development contributions policy up next, and I'm just going to go to the track change version. And just to let you know, Deborah, if you're asking about the maps, we do have a couple of updated maps coming. They've just been designed at the moment, so this version doesn't have those updated maps yet. So that might be, if you're asking anything around the community infrastructure maps or any of the reserve maps, we do have updated versions of those coming, but they're just not dropped into this document, but they have been dropped into, yeah.
It's on the document itself, the ones that are included. Just want a query.
Okay, we'll get to that. I'm just bringing up the track change version so it's easier for everyone to go through.
I must admit, it's a wee bit difficult to navigate through this this document, so it's a bit challenging.
So it's page 127 of the pre-reading pack for the track change version of the development contributions policy. So the key changes to this policy are the update of maps at the back in part 5, which are to do with catchment maps. We've also got some additions are around discretionary exemption applications that have been added in as well. So we also have reference to seasonal accommodation references. We have clarified a statement on the application of DCs to council developments as well. And we have removed some references to growth areas in one of the tables, which I'll go through shortly, that relates to the Darfield and Kui wastewater scheme that we didn't actually need. So the key changes to draw your attention to are on pages 134, which includes the mention of seasonal accommodation. Then that's to align it with the district plan wording that's in that document. On page 138, there's the statement around exemptions. Council developments are subject to applicable development contributions except for any requirement for the same activity as the document itself. And then on page 140, we have the removed certain areas of the wastewater scheme because they are not required. And then further down the document, there will be the addition to the maps. So those are the only real changes to draw your attention to, unless there's any specific questions around any of the changes that you can see in the document. I'm happy to take those now, and I have the subject matter experts with me to help answer any questions in more detail.
Deborah.
Thank you. Just with regards to the maps, your catchment maps in part 5, just wondering around the Burnham area, right, which is actually included in the high growth roading area under the Greater Christchurch Partnership. So we've included that area as a growth area, but when we actually go to collect DCs for, say, reserves or community facilities, we're still showing that it's actually in the Eastern Selwyn high growth area. No, it's in the ward basis in the Southwest Selwyn area. Now, I think that's where you might come unstuck if you're not following boundaries. Is it, or I'll put it a question, is it appropriate to follow the practical boundaries of the Greater Christchurch Partnership arrangement that we have with regards to the inclusion of that boundary, which includes Burnham, as opposed to putting it in the eastern, in the Eastern Selwyn high growth area? The reason why I'm asking this is that we also have structure plans that for both Ellesmere and Melbourne, and they have their natural boundaries, which are outside the Greater Christchurch Partnership area. And I just think it would make it really tidy that you're not having to reference 2 lots of maps for roading, community services, etc. So I'm just asking, is it appropriate to tidy that boundary up?
Yeah, so the maps that Jodie referred to before, which aren't in this document, have actually aligned to the high growth area for the same as the transportation map. So yeah, so we've actually done that, and we've just made that adjustment. So Burnham, I think it's Selwyn Huts was the other area that are both included in that Eastern Selwyn area now, and the other boundaries are just adjusted for Southwest and Northwest to reflect that as well. So that's actually being done in the new set of maps that will be attached to the document when it's completed. Yes. Yep. That's correct. Yep.
I'm happy to supply those maps. I do have them, just not on this document. Okay.
Thank you. Lydia.
My question collates to page 140 and around the wastewater. And so I was just wondering, are we using consistent language around Eastern Selwyn sewage scheme? But like obviously Darfield and Kui are in the northwestern maps and whatnot. So I was just wondering around consistent language, because if someone, say from Darfield, reads that and it looks like they're in the Eastern Selwyn part when they're actually in the northwest?
Yeah, so I'm not sure where it says in that document, but we did change that as part of the annual plan to be the Selwyn sewage scheme. So that the eastern word should not be there. It's the Selwyn sewage scheme and includes the townships of, yeah, even in the Ellesmere townships as well. So I agree, it should be the Selwyn sewage scheme.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sophie.
Yeah, same page. And that was going to be one question. So, because, yeah, we have changed it to acknowledge that the sewerage scheme covers a wider area. But the other question was, is there any plan to increase those charges? Because that's the same figures as from last year, and inflation's pushed everything else up. And I feel like I'm asking a grant question, but it comes up regularly. No, but it's true. Like, is this reflective of the actual costs, given that we know
I
they
don't
are
believe
going
these
up?
numbers have been updated yet, have they? So I think the finance team are working through those at the moment.
Yeah, the development contributions calculations are have not been completed yet. So all the financial information in this document is not up to date. The wording is what we're bringing you to today, and yeah.
Thank you.
Megan.
Kia ora, my question's on page, relating to page 153 of the slide pack, which is other matters, refund of development contributions. So when I'm looking at a policy, it's a guideline, right? It's a document or showing the tikanga that tells us kind of where we can find information and how we do things. And when I read it, I thought, well, that's great that's in there because it gives some guidelines, and it's actually triggered me to go, okay, so if we have to refund development contributions which haven't been used in a 10-year period, in the case of reserves, for example, then do we have another document that therefore tracks all of that, kind of where the risks are coming with money that we have to return? And I hope the answer is yes, because if it's no, then I think we need it. But if the answer is yes, then should it be referred to in the policy so that it kind of takes the people to the place, or is that too granular?
Where's Rach?
Yeah, there is.
Sorry, just could you swap microphones? I think they were just switched off for the recording. Thanks.
Yeah, so the all development contributions that are captured are recorded in the financial system and tracked through that process. And and the balances are updated every year. So there's and also the expenditure and any interest that accrues is also included in part of that whole financial system. So, and we are required, I think, under the legislation to maintain records of what's being spent where and within our catchment areas and that sort of thing. So, yeah, it is captured. You're trying to track down, I think it would be very unlikely in Selwyn that we wouldn't be spending a development contribution within a 10-year period just because of the growth and the requirement for, it's just a sort of a backstop.
And I guess it's more of maybe an audit and risk function of governance in any event, just to know where it's tracking. So it's probably for that committee more than in this policy. So, kia ora. So long as we know somehow.
Thanks, Megan. Thank you, Jodie.
Are there any further questions around the changes that we've made to this policy? No? So that's the only those are the only policies that we've made substantial changes to since December 2023. There are no other policies in detail to go through. So that concludes this section of the workshop as well.
Sorry, then I do have one more question. And
Sorry,
that's
Megan.
on the rating of Māori freehold land. I know that came out to us to review. I've looked at it, and I know that it's currently gone away to be assessed against legislation, I
Yeah,
think.
a legislative compliance review. Yeah.
Right, because when I read it, I was thinking there were parts of it that weren't referring to the latest changes in legislation. My question is it coming back to us before it goes out for public consultation?
Yeah, so all the policies will be ready as part of the consultation. So they will come back. We'll keep you apprised of the changes. I think we've got that scheduled for the next briefing, I think on the 6th of March. The legislative compliance review of those particular policies should be completed by then. So that's we're anticipating to bring you back any changes that have occurred since that review. We also do plan to take the rating of Māori freehold land. We have a plan to consult with Te Pou Mataho about that internally and then decide next steps, whether that needs to go up to Runako as well, separately.
Cool. Are there any other questions on things that have been discussed today?
Yeah, I've got one.
Deborah?
Sorry, I have to look up my 158. It's, I guess, looking at our transport, and we've got a special assessment with regards to heavy vehicles using our roads. And I note that it's based on a passenger vehicle equivalence, and it'll be factored by 0.9 to determine the multiplier. I'm just wondering, where do we get the 0.9 from? Is it an assessment through the legislation, or is it something that needs to be captured by CPI, or just curious with regards to the difference in the heavy vehicles, etc.
Yeah, good question, Deborah. So basically, through this review of the development contribution, we moved away from the sort of typical way of sort of looking at it in terms of saying, you know, 2 movements in and out of a property is equal to 1 car, and 6 is equal to a truck, and 10 is equal to a truck and trailer unit. We did some analysis and looked at the different way that we could assess that aspect, and we came upon the fact that it was better to use a peak hour flow because the peak hour and the traffic aspects associated with that actually contributed to the most of the impact on the network. And so the 0.9 is basically that representation of the calculation, and we've looked at that across a whole lot of reference sources to establish that. So that's all established in science. But and that's more for the typical car movements. But we do actually have a separate one for the heavy vehicles, which is linked to the gross floor area associated with, for instance, a commercial or industrial activity. It's linked again to the new district plan, which also references what an equivalent car movement represents. So we can actually make the conversion between the two. And in the new district plan, we've got now the requirement for applicants to produce an integrated transport assessment for high trip generating activities. So we can link backwards and forwards in terms of the information that applicants are required to provide us to generate or to provide us information on peak traffic flows. And so hopefully we've got a really good synergy now compared to what we had before.
That's that.
Shane.
Thanks, Deborah. Andrew, does it take into account, I think there's new maps out for the HPMV vehicles, the heavier vehicles again that pay more. Does that 0.9 take into account those vehicles? And I guess the follow on from that would be, if they used a heavy vehicle on a road not fit for that, is there enforcement? What's the consequence? It's obvious to the road, but what is the consequence?
Well, it comes back to the fundamental philosophy around development contributions that we get the development contributions on the extra capacity needed on our network to cater for growth. So it's not necessarily or cannot be used to sort of supplement normal maintenance and renewal type funding. For instance, if a truck's running up and down a road more each day, it's to do with that new activity and what it's generating and how we can recover that growth component of the cost to our network at that time.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Given what you've just told us, Andrew, sadly, my electric car weighs far more than my other vehicle, and that's the nature of the beast of the batteries. So given that, is there a new allocation for electric vehicles and the effect that that's going to have on our roading networks?
Well, thank you for making the effort to getting an electric vehicle. It is actually a bit of a problem with them, just as an aside, particularly with the buses and things like that, with the extra weight of the batteries and the additional wear and tear on our roads. But again, getting back to the point I just made to Shane before, it's more to do with increased capacity. For instance, if at intersection we need to upgrade it from a roundabout to traffic signals, it doesn't necessarily or cannot necessarily factor in those requirements because, again, it's a wear and tear aspect on the network as opposed to accommodating growth. But it's something that we'll have to be aware of, particularly as technology evolves and the heavy vehicle fleet transitions from typical fossil fuel to potentially battery and or hydrogen, which will add more weight to those vehicles and will have more impact on our roads.
Thank you. Just before we close, it'd be nice to just talk through the timing of the next meetings that we're going to have here, Tim. So just talk us through, next week we're going to have the Infrastructure Committee meeting, which is going to have some of the detail that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks that councillors are interested in, the water and the roading stuff. And then we're going to need a space for the final things from today to come back to everyone. Can you just talk us through what happens from here, or Jody, whoever's going to present the next steps?
So we have scheduled for, as part of the briefing on the 6th of March, a time to go through all the policy reviews the legislative compliance reviews that have been completed for the financial policies. They'll be potentially part of that. We also plan for the KPIs, to socialise KPIs with you, draft consultation document, and sort of a recap of the consultation campaign plan and support material. So that's what we provide. We've got scheduled in terms of workshops to provide. That's the next workshop that we've got as part of the briefing on the 6th.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jody, for taking us through that in term today. And we'll close the workshop.